Last year, there was a lot of action on the Facebook platform. What I'm going to do tonight is go over what's happened in about the last 6 to 7 weeks since November. There hasn't been a huge amount, but there have been some really key things, and there's a couple of great little things that hopefully will help you guys out with development. Before I start, how many of you are technical people? Please raise your hands. All right, good. And the rest of you, don't worry. I promise not to go too slow. I will go fast. If you have any questions about stuff at the end, please come and find me during the break. So, Happy New Year, everyone. Awesome. First thing you need to know, if you're an app developer, is for me to move out of the way. App profile pages are going away. You will no longer have a profile page for your app automatically. If you want to have a fan page or a public profile for your app, you need to create one manually. Okay? This is because at Facebook, the app profile page code base, I guess, was diverging from the main page code base, so they wanted to bring it back into the same unified bit of code. So no more app profile pages as of February 1st. They will disappear. They will disappear. So what you want to do, if you have an app profile page for a game or an app that has a lot of fans, a lot of engagement or content, like photos, what you need to do is download all of that content manually, create a new page in the product or app category with the same name as your app. And what Facebook will do is migrate all the likes, all the fans for you automatically. But the content you have to do yourself. As Todd mentioned earlier, the search goes directly to the app, which is great, more traffic. When you create a new app, you can choose during the process in the developer app, you can choose to create a profile page to go along with it. So those two things are separate. You have an app and a page, but the page is optional. On the Graph API, there's an application object. That application object is going to lose all of its connections because it won't have them anymore. By connections, I mean things like albums, the feed, links, stuff that you normally see for a page. So the application object will no longer have any of that. And those will go away on March 1st. And finally, there's a nice add page tab dialog, which looks a bit like this, which you can invoke using a URL directly, or you can use the FBUI JavaScript SDK method. It's nice and simple. It's got one thing that's missing from the old style, which is you cannot pre-fill the page that you want them to choose. So up here, you can't fill this in automatically for anyone, which is a bit of a pain if you've got users who have hundreds and hundreds of pages to manage. But otherwise, that's good. That's an advancement for us, I think. Finally, the subscribe button. So Todd mentioned this as well. If you're going to subscribe to anyone, don't do Zuckerberg. Well, you probably have already, but I recommend Snoop Dogg, because he's a fantastic user of Facebook. The code to embed a subscribe button is very similar to all the other Facebook social plugins, just like a like button or send. So there's a bunch of ways to do it. There's the HTML5 way, which uses the data href attribute. And you can use the XFBML way as well, which is the old-fashioned way. There's also an iframe version. The cool thing about this is now, basically it's a follow button. So again, Facebook is encroaching on Twitter's territory. If you want to subscribe or to follow someone's public updates in Facebook, you can put that button anywhere. And the example that Todd showed is a really good one. And so that's following someone's personal profile, right? It's not a page like, it's a different thing. But it's highly powerful. It's really good. Okay, so as part of modernizing Facebook's code base and their SDKs, they've decided to stop supporting a handful. How many of you use the old Python SDK? Oh, I'm sorry. Well, it's okay. Hopefully the community will pick it up. So the Python, C#, and the old Facebook iPhone SDK are now deprecated, so they're not going to support them officially anymore. All right? C# too. Use them both. Okay, it's not your lucky night. I'm sorry. I'm sorry. That source code, of course, is available to be cloned by anyone, so the hope is that the community will pick it up and start maintaining it, but Facebook have decided not to themselves. So that's all available in GitHub, so if you are concerned, please try and convince people to help maintain it, because those are valuable things to have. I think Facebook, they don't have enough staff to keep maintaining these things. They try and keep their development teams and their engineering headcount really low, so they've chosen not to do it. The other SDKs still continue, so the JS SDK is still going strong. The PHP SDK is still going to be updated and maintained and officially supported. The iOS SDK replaces the iPhone SDK. And there's an Android SDK as well. So yes, if you use those, again, the community will step up, one hopes. This is an interesting little bit of standards compliance that Facebook have adopted. So part of the HTTP specification says that you can use a cache validator called an e-tag. And Facebook have decided to start sending an e-tag header back with the response from all of the Graph API calls. Okay, what does that mean? What that means is you can hopefully reduce the amount of bandwidth your app is sending and retrieving from the Facebook API servers. So if you have an API call that is my list of friends, Facebook will return my list of friends with an e-tag header in the response. You can save that e-tag on your server somewhere. When you need to ask for my list of friends again, you send a conditional GET request, it's called. So that's what if none match. So basically you tell Facebook's API servers, if this tag doesn't match anything you've got, send me the new data. Right? So when that works, Facebook's API servers will send back a HTTP 304 response, which tells you nothing's changed and you don't have, none of the data's in there. Right? So it's a quick way of validating that you've got the right data. And in a lot of high traffic, high frequency API calling apps, you'll find that this can dramatically reduce the bandwidth that you're using. You still need to make the HTTP requests though. It's just the bandwidth you save. So that's cool. That's a standard RFC 2616 thing. It's been around for 20 years. And it's nice to see Facebook embracing it because it's a pretty quick win for a lot of people. So that's great. So less data across the wire. They recommend that you don't use it for things that change frequently. So grabbing my feed, for example, is not something you really want to bother trying to use the e-tag for because it will change every few minutes. So you're not going to gain much benefit. And so stuff like friends list or albums. And also, if you're worried about throttling limits, which Facebook do impose on a lot of apps, this call does affect your rates. So it counts towards any limit. So just be aware of that. Moving on, you can now upload video to events using the Graph API, which is great. There's the endpoint. You post to graph-video.facebook.com and the event ID/videos. That's the connection. You need to use a user access token. You need to send it as multi-part form data, standard stuff. You can send a title and description, and it returns with a video ID. So if you have event management apps, you can now automatically suck in video from one source and stick it into Facebook, which is great. Again, this is only for public events, though. All right, so Graph API. So Facebook have been working last year a lot on making the Graph API have functional parity with the legacy REST API. So one of the things they've done recently to make that make that work better is they've allowed us to manage app properties using the Graph API. So every app has a set of properties, including its callback URL, its name, a bunch of stuff. Previously, you could edit those using the REST API, but the REST API is going to go away, so now they've let us do it using the Graph API. And here's how you do it. It's very simple. You've got the app ID as the Open Graph object. You can get the list of properties by using the fields bit at the very top. And you can also, you need to use an application access token to get these details. Some of it is open to the public, so things like the application name or the monthly active users, all of that is available without an access token, right? That's public information. But if you want to find out an application's callback URL, you need to use that application token itself. So here's an example call. I'm just asking for the app domains of my demo test app, and it's come back with a bit of JSON. Really quite straightforward. You can also set properties by posting to the same endpoint, passing along the property name and property value. For that, again, you need the app access token. There's a huge list of app properties, all kinds of stuff, like the secure tab URL is a great one. If you manage a lot of applications, you'll find that using this as a tool will really decrease the amount of donkey work you have to do. You can automate a lot of your processes, and it becomes really powerful. So they're trying to make the Graph API have parity functionally with the REST API. They've missed a few things still. So you cannot set the icon URL and the logo for the app yet, but hopefully they'll address that soon. Again, apps in the Graph API. So one of the things that a lot of agencies do is they've got tons of apps, hundreds of apps, and hundreds of developers across different places, and becomes a very difficult manual process to manage access to all of these things. So now using the Graph API, this is something that didn't exist in the REST API. This is new functionality. You can now manage the developers and administrators and all the people who have access to your app on the back end. So to find out who the people are, you can just say, use the app ID, and it's the roles connection there. And it returns, again, a pretty straightforward bit of JSON, which you can use to do stuff. You can also create people. So I can invite Todd. I can send him a request to be an administrator of my app. And I can do that automatically using this bit here. So I can say, I post to the roles thing, I pass his user ID and a string, which determines what role I want him to have. So you can be a developer of my app. And then again, you can delete people from it as well. So again, in the agency model, if you have a lot of staff, a lot of apps, what happens sometimes is you have employees who churn or who leave for whatever reason. Sometimes you need to figure out how do you remove them. And if you have hundreds of apps, it becomes a really unwieldy manual process, which will be subject to human error. So this helps get around that. Okay, almost done. A few other bits. As Todd mentioned, the timeline is released to everyone, which is fantastic. For those of you, have any of you tried creating Open Graph beta actions or objects? Anyone? I have. Okay, so you can create a custom action, which I won't go into detail now because there's not time. The good thing is they're going to start approving the custom actions now. So a custom action, for example, would be something like, not like, but say I fancy someone. That could be a verb, a custom action you do. Facebook are going to vet and check every single custom action that developers ask for, because they don't want things like hate or murder or kill or anything negative. They want positive actions. So they're going to check every single one, and they're starting this month. If you do have actions that you're waiting for approval on, you will get a Facebook notification telling you what's happening. Okay, as of the 21st of December, the REST API is officially deprecated. Deprecated means that it is not officially supported. It will continue working for a while, but they're not going to necessarily fix any bugs. They're definitely not going to add any new features. So if you haven't looked at moving away from the REST API, you better do so now. There's a new Open Graph metadata tag for videos. If you want users to be able to view your video in the Facebook stream, when they're using HTTPS, you need to add this bit of metadata to your page. On the credit side, previously you could have offer pages that users could fill out a survey or give some marketing information to a third party, and that would in turn give them Facebook credits. Game and app developers now can do the same thing, but instead of giving the user Facebook credits, they will get your game or your app credits. So if I'm Playfish and I've got Playfish Cash, I can use the same surveys that Facebook have been using themselves to get people to get credits for my in-game currency, right? So it's another source of revenue for developers. On the games front as well, there's a new list of categories, and they're working to update the dashboard to make it more useful. You can now use filters on the home connection. So if I do me/home using the Graph API, I'll get a big list of stuff. You can now use predefined and custom filters so I can use the API to get a list of only my friends, or only my colleagues, only my close friends, or only my family, for example. And finally, also, short URL redirects are now tracked. So if you pasted a bit.ly link in or something like that into Facebook, they weren't actually tracking that in terms of insights. So you wouldn't actually, that data would get lost. Now they will be tracked. So they are following those redirects. Okay, almost done. A few changes. One of the things I like to do is let developers know what's going to break, because it's really important and it's really annoying if you don't know and it happens overnight. So this is what happened since November. As of the 13th of December, the FBJS SDK OAuth is always true. This caused a few problems with some people, but mostly it seems to have gone okay. Did anyone have a problem? No, so good, excellent. As I said before, the REST API is officially deprecated, which is great. FBML is officially deprecated, which means it's not supported. It will still work until the June 1st, at which point it will be turned off. The FBData.js SDK API is not supported. Hardly anyone was using them. Set auto resize is now renamed to set auto grow. If you notice any tabs that don't change their size when you load them, this is because the developers have not updated their code. There's a credits policy change, which I assume is reacting to some clever person's app, which basically says that you cannot have an app that lets people transfer credits back and forth to each other. And finally, on the 15th of January, all apps are now using Request 2.0 and Request 2.0 efficient. Stuff you need to know that's coming up. The canvas name app properties changing the namespace, not a huge deal. App profile pages, as we mentioned, are going to be gone. On March 1st, Facebook will start returning 960 pixel dimension images when you query the photos table, which is great. Higher res pictures are always welcome. If your app is expecting a smaller image, it could be a problem though. Also, the Graph API application object, as I mentioned before, those connections are gone. On April 1st, you have to use all URLs that you use to interact with Facebook and users usually have to be, they will have to be part of your application domains. So this is an attempt to sort of prevent click spamming and other nefarious acts. So make sure your registered app domain and all your URLs are pointing to the same domain. Apps must now have a user support email address as well as a URL. It used to be optional. That seems pretty straightforward and obvious. Again, the deprecated SDKs, so the Python, C# and the Facebook iPhone SDK, those GitHub repositories will go into private mode. So basically, Facebook is turning them off. Again, the community hopefully will pick them up. Claiming domains for insight. So if you have, say, www.iskandar.co.uk, which I do, I can claim that inside Facebook by putting a bit of metadata in my web page. Previously, you could do that with a page ID. Now you need to use your user ID or an app ID, right? And finally, on June 1st, FPML ends forever, which I'm very pleased to hear. Okay, that's all. This is the last slide. I'd encourage all of you, since today is the big SOPA PIPA blackout day, please donate to the EFF or the Open Rights Group if you've got any spare cash, because they're the ones who are really spending a lot of time and money in Washington, D.C. particularly, trying to lobby against retarded legislation. Otherwise, Twitter and stuff, and ask me your stuff in the break. Thank you.
You're going to get the mic, transfer the mic over to Bernie?